Good morning, this is Michael Leahy of the Irish Freedom Party. I'm speaking to you today from France. I've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to be a witness to some of the recent disturbances in that country, certainly not firsthand, but I have witnessed the police actions around the area of Paris, and I've spoken to many people, many French people here. I think it is fair to say that the country is, as it often has been in the past, something of a tinder keg which is waiting to explode. Many native French people now are extremely worried that their country is being taken over by something that they don't fully understand. They are now beginning to realize the enormous damage done to their country by unvetted immigration, which has taken place over the last 3 to 4 decades. And not so much the immigration as the utter failure to integrate people, for the most part Muslim people from North Africa, into French culture. Something that of course could have been predicted by anybody who understands the nature of the Muslim religion and the difference of attitude between Islam and Christianity. But the French state was unique in that it utterly refused to accept that there was any difference. It simply went with the French revolutionary tradition of that all human beings are the same and that they will all get along perfectly well together. But of course, history teaches us something very different. While I was here, I had the good fortune to visit Les Deux Églises, the last resting place of General Charles de Gaulle, who's a particular hero of mine. That's why I'm wearing the Cross of Lorraine pin. The Cross of Lorraine has a particular significance to Ireland, which I may explain in another video, but it was of course the symbol of the Free French resistance during the Civil War and is very much associated with General de Gaulle. Many people regard de Gaulle as one of the architects of modern Europe, but when he came to power there was a great deal of doubt as to whether he would pull France out of the European Economic Community. He did not do so, but he insisted that the European Economic Community would not integrate any closer than it already was. He insisted on national autonomy. He withdrew France from NATO. Under no circumstances would General de Gaulle have allowed the development of the European Union. He understood the value of national sovereignty, national independence, and insisted on a specific role for France while he saw the advantage of alliances and the advantage of economic trading and free trade, as do we. He would never have sacrificed the independence of France to a European Union. The European Union was established long after the death of General de Gaulle and long after the death of those people in France who had fought for its independence and who would never have sacrificed that independence to a Marxist ideal, which is what European Union is. If you want to know why he would have been so opposed to European Union, you need only look at France today, which is the result of continued EU-style compromise, mass migration, and the ending of national autonomy and national independence. This has demoralized the French people, a proud people for so many centuries at the center of European history. They were and are a proud people, but they have now become demoralized, and they see their cities being burned, they're being torn apart by the political mistakes of an elite who are more interested in ideology than in the representing pragmatic interests of their own people. It's exactly the same in Ireland. If you want to know what Ireland will be like in a few years' time, look at France today. However, there may be some upside in this. There is a very strong possibility that this series of protests is remember, France is on the brink of civil war. The army have recently warned the president that unless he imposes order, they will intervene. The army will intervene and take over government and restore order. Now, that has never happened in a European democracy since the 1950s. And the last time it very nearly happened was again in France until General de Gaulle came to power. But the army are not going to permit their country to be destroyed by Europe or by their own politicians, and they will intervene if necessary. This has led to a situation where there's a real possibility now that Marine Le Pen will come to power. And I can tell you, if that happens, that's it for the European Union. It's going to finish. And the real danger is it will finish in complete and total chaos and complete collapse. I want to remind you that the Irish Freedom Party has tended to be, in its short history, has tended to be right on all the major issues. We were right on the lockdowns. We were the first party to come out and demand an end to lockdowns and point out that they were counterproductive, that they were causing far more harm than they were good. We were the first people who advocated against mandatory vaccinations. We said that the vaccinations, they were unproven. We're now finding the health effects of the vaccines are quite extraordinary, quite catastrophic. The death rates have gone through the roof. The government will do everything it can to pretend that this has nothing to do with the vaccinations, but the truth will eventually out on that one. We were the only party 3 years ago to make a detailed submission on the dangers of the proposed hate speech legislation. That legislation is now causing Ireland to be seen as a pariah state among modern democracies. It is an astonishing piece of legislation, and because we do not have a proper political culture, because we do not have a proper media culture, it has been passed overwhelmingly by the Dáil. That is a quite extraordinary situation. That our Dáil, in a democratic state, can mandate the worst, most draconian attack against freedom of speech of any democratic state in the post-war era is quite extraordinary, but we have allowed it to happen. We were right about that. We were right about it 3 years ago, and people should have listened to us. I now tell you, we're going to be right about this. The European Union, if it does not get its act together, is going to collapse into chaos. We advocate for a complete withdrawal of the European treaties. We advocate for a dissolution of the European Union before it is too late, because if that does not happen in an orderly fashion, it will happen in a disorderly fashion. If France elects somebody like Marine Le Pen, I have very little truck with her, but if it does elect somebody like that, that's going to be curtains for the European Union, and it is going to collapse in chaos. Poland is now becoming the main economic and military power in Europe, and they're not going to put up with the centralized authoritarianism of the European Union that they have escaped from only 2 decades ago from the Soviet Union. That's not going to happen. The European Union is heading for a serious fall, and unless we can organise that properly, that fall will be chaotic, particularly for those of us who are members of the European Union. We're often accused of being Eurosceptic, but the reality is this system is simply not working. It has created enormous damage, and we need to redraw it. If the European Union collapses, the Irish government, which has hidden behind for the past 40 years every bit of corruption, every bit of malfeasance, every attack against free speech, every attack against property rights, it's always been blamed on the European Union. Where will they go now? Where will they go until the European Union collapses and they no longer have Europe to blame for all their incompetence? I really wonder. I really think that our main parties have nothing to offer to the Irish people. We advocate for an orderly breaking up of the European Union and a coming together of the European states in a free trade, in a respectful free trade area, but putting an end to the ever closer integration. We need to look very carefully at the events that are unfolding in France. These are not isolated events. They have happened before. We see the collapse of the Dutch government a few nights ago. There are very, very serious tensions within Europe. We see that there has been a conservative government election in Italy. If the same thing happens in France, everything is going to change, and change very dramatically. The Irish people will not be told about any of this because they're dependent on RTE. I've recently done a video on RTE and the central crisis in RTE not being their financial chicanery and their brutal top-down system of government from a Director General who ignores her board. That's not the real issue. The real issue is the utter intellectual elitism of Radio Televisión, which is damaging our democracy and which is a real threat to our society and to our nation. This has been Michael Leahy talking from the great and noble country of France. I believe France will survive this trauma, but I believe it may emerge as a very, very different state. France is central to Europe, and France is central to whatever happens in this European Union, so-called, which is not a union or anything but a union. It is an artificial combination of states which has done great damage to all of them. So this is Michael Leahy of the Irish Freedom Party. Thank you very much for listening.